You've probably seen by now reports and videos that allege that I'm some kind of apologist for pedophilia or some kind of enabler of child abuse. Nothing could be further from the truth. And I find those crimes to be absolutely disgusting. I find those people to be disgusting.
Remember the Berkeley riots that happened in California a few weeks ago? Well, this is the guy they were so desperate to keep from speaking at the university. His name, for those of you who don't know, is Milo Yiannopoulos. He's a right-wing speaker who goes around colleges, universities, TV shows, even live streams, discussing his views on certain subjects and issues. On this particular live stream, he had a discussion about the legal age of consent and sexual relationships between people of varying generations. Now, according to Milo, the footage from the stream was not only taken out of context, but was also edited together to make it look like Milo was a paedophile apologist. With that in mind, take a look.
This arbitrary and oppressive idea of consent, which totally destroys, the understanding that many of us have of the complexities and subtleties and complicated nature of many relationships. People are messy and complex, and actually, in the homosexual world particularly, some of those relationships between younger boys and older men, the sort of coming-of-age relationships, the relationships in which those older men help those young boys to discover who they are and give them security and safety and provide them with love and a reliable and sort of a rock where they can't speak to their parents. Some of those relationships are some
like
of the most
molestation to me. It sounds
yeah, well,
like
you know what?
It sounds like Catholic priest molestation to me.
And you know what? I'm grateful for Father Michael. I wouldn't give nearly such good head if it wasn't for him.
Now, anyone with a fucking brain in their nut would understand that that was a joke. If you don't find it particularly funny or tasteful, then that's fair enough. But it was clearly a joke. The alarming part about this little interaction was when Milo was talking about older men and younger boys.
Some of those relationships between younger boys and older men, the sort of coming-of-age relationships, the relationships in which those older men help those young boys to discover who they are and give them security and safety and provide them with love and a reliable and sort of a rock where they can't speak to their parents.
But he explains this in his video response.
When I spoke about relationships between older men and younger men, I used the word boys, and I shouldn't have done that. Gay people do say like boy and girl to mean people of consenting adults very often. Sometimes it's usually like the passive partner gets to is the boy. But I understand that straight people wouldn't necessarily know that, and so that I wouldn't do again.
And it's not just homosexuals that do the whole boy-girl thing. I think it's quite common for a couple in a straight relationship to refer to the woman as a girl. And I've even heard a few men's wives refer to their husbands as boy, as a term of endearment. Now, it's not to my taste, but it is a case of looking at the meaning behind a phrase as opposed to the actual phrase itself. Having said that, Milo made a silly mistake here, where they were talking about cross-generational relationships and the age of consent, and then he starts talking about boys and men in a relationship together. Now, I choose to believe that it was a shit choice of wording, as he said in the response, and that he didn't literally mean 8-year-old boys should be entering sexual relationships with 40-year-old men. I only have his word on that, but I think it was a poor choice of words tied together with purposeful editing.
And yet here you are talking about how, look, some of these kids that get diddled by these priests, I mean, it's a good thing for them. They're getting this love. And now they are also getting
You're misunderstanding what pedophilia means. Pedophilia is not a sexual attraction to somebody 13 years old who is sexually mature. Pedophilia is attraction to children who have not reached puberty. Pedophilia is attraction to people who don't have functioning sex organs yet, who have not gone through puberty, who are too young to be able to understand the way their bodies. That is not what we're talking about.
The frightening thing here is that he mentioned 13-year-olds and sexually mature in the same sentence. But just notice how the screen cap of Milo cuts away as the audio has him say, sexually mature. Looks like more clever editing to me.
You're misunderstanding what pedophilia means. Pedophilia is not a sexual attraction to somebody 13 years old who is sexually mature.
See? Now, we don't know if that was edited, or if the streaming software just did that on its own and Milo actually did say that. If he did, then it's pretty damning on the whole paedophilia front. Although, just to make that clear, Even if Milo did support the idea of adults having sex with people in the early stages of adolescence, i.e. 13-year-olds, that would be hebephilia, not paedophilia. There's hardly any difference in my mind, because they're both disgusting. But it is worth noting because we like to deal in facts here, don't we? Anyway, here's Milo's defence of that comment.
One of the numbers that people are fixating on is 13, and the implication that I was advocating for sex between 13-year-olds. Well, the video that came out was edited to include a section where I said that consent was arbitrary and oppressive, but that was from a discussion about affirmative consent on college campuses. That was placed next to a section about 13-year-olds to make it look like I was saying that consent for 13-year-olds was arbitrary and oppressive, and that's not the case.
So the 13-year-old comment was placed next to a section which was focused on a discussion about consent on college campuses. This is all assuming that Milo is telling the truth, of course, which I'm inclined to believe he is, to be honest.
You are advocating for cross-generational relationships here. Can we be honest about that?
Yeah, I don't mind admitting that, and I think particularly in the gay world and outside the Catholic Church, if that's where some of you want to go with this, I think in the gay world, some of the most important, enriching, and incredibly, life-affirming, important, shaping relationships, very often between younger boys and older men, can be hugely positive experiences.
So this is where it becomes even more clear with the whole "it's been edited together to make it look bad" thing. Because when you're implying paedophilia or hebephilia, and then go straight into a section about cross-generational relationships, the first thing people are going to jump to in their minds is relationships with children. But that's not necessarily what cross-generational relationships are, is it? It could be a 20-year-old going out with a 30-year-old, or even an 18-year-old going out with a 25-year-old, or a 60-year-old going out with an 80-year-old. That clever piece of editing says to me that this video was placed out there on purpose in order to hurt Milo personally and professionally. Here's what he had to say about it anyway.
Very often kids of 17 will have relationships, for instance, with people of 29 years old. And that's what happened to me, and that's exactly the ages. I was 17 and he was 29. And it was a relationship that ended up lasting a decade. And that's where I was coming from, speaking about my own personal experiences of this stuff, saying that, of course this stuff happens and it's disgusting and I abhor it. Of course any reasonable person would. It's revolting. And I can only say again, I find nothing but disgust, as my reporting record shows, for people who support and stick up for and make excuses for pedophiles. That is not what I intended to do in these conversations. And speaking from my own personal experience, all I was seeking to convey was that I had a relationship, I had an experience as a 17-year-old with a 29-year-old guy that turned into a 10-year relationship. I mean, my first real proper boyfriend was the guy I ended up being with for 10 years.
So in my mind, that's what he's most likely to be talking about in the original live stream. Relationships between 18 and 30-year-olds. Which is perfectly legal, and also falls under the banner of cross-generational relationships. Now I'll be the first one to hold my hands up and apologise if it ever turns out that Milo Yiannopoulos is in fact a paedophile and there's damning evidence to prove it. But this video absolutely stinks, and I don't trust it any more than I trust a politician. I'm sure you can come to your own conclusions, and I implore you to look at the original contents in the links below. Too often people's careers and relationships are ruined because of false accusations like these, even when they're innocent. Don't believe everything the media tells you. They're trying to push your rhetoric just like politicians and celebrities are. Remember, always be skeptical. I promise you'll get some more light-hearted videos soon. I just thought this was worth putting out there to help put things into perspective. See ya.